Hello everybody and welcome back. This is Mystic Games. Today we're going to be doing a species tier list on Against the Storm. There have been changes made in the DLC. As you can see, I added the frog. You guys can watch my old species tier list. Things have changed on my opinion, especially since the more and more hours I put into gameplay. The changes that recently were made have changed needs for specific species and made the game a little bit more complicated, we'll say. So we're going to start with humans and kind of go in order, talking about each one individually, like their resolve, their resilience, their demands, how much their demands rise, their hunger tolerance, break intervals, all that kind of stuff. So humans are going to be first, as they are one of the base species. I'm a big fan of humans. They have a pretty high base resolve of 15, which means they have a lot of time where you have a chance to set them up before having to worry about hostility. They have a low resilience. Their demands are relatively high. They have a pretty high resolve threshold of 30. They have decadence, where the demands increase of 4. Hunger threshold of 6, and break intervals of 2 minutes. So every 2 minutes they need a break, which is pretty good. I like them for their base resolve, and I like them for their break intervals being relatively short, because they go less often than some of the other races. They have good specialties as well, like their proficiencies are brewing and farming. I prefer farming, obviously. If you guys watch any of my older content, I still prefer farming most of the time. But brewing is a nice little bonus. It does help with certain things. So yeah. They have, like, their needs are housing. They can take any type of housing, like the basic housing. Normally I try to skip basic housing and go right to human housing most of the time, or Pacific species housing personally. Normally it is pretty doable to do so, depending on what species you have. So I normally like to try to build my human housing immediately. They like biscuits, pie, and porridge, all of which is... biscuits and pie, because they take flour, is kind of like a multi-step thing. Whereas porridge is probably the most easy and basic food that they have. It really just requires a water source and then some sort of food that can be used in porridge. They like clothing, which is coats for them. Pretty much every species has some sort of clothing now, by the way. So that's new. They have service needs, which are leisure and religion. So they have 3 service needs, or, oh my god, they have 2 service needs, sorry. When assigned to a hearth, they reduce impatience. That is their bonus on the hearth. It actually doesn't tell me that on the wiki without clicking on them specifically. I just know that's what it does. Let me see if I can get the specific number on the hearth, what it does, for a second here. Let me see. I'm seeing if it's on the wiki at all. It's actually not on the wiki. That's actually really surprising. Anyways, they reduce the time it takes to get the queen frustrated at you, so lowers that from going up a little bit slower, which can be useful. I'm not a big one on using humans on the hearth. Normally I don't have to worry about hostility that much. There's a lot of ways to deal with it. And they also have a high resolve, so normally I'm not that worried about the growth of impatience as it is anyways. That being said, all things included here, how do I rate humans? I think humans are a very solid choice in most maps. Again, mushroom map, humans, I probably wouldn't want them because there's not a lot of fertile soil. But generally, if you have a map with average fertile soil or higher, they're like probably an A for me. I like to have the extra yield from them on the fertile soil. Essentially, that 10% can give you a lot of food because it stacks, you know, you can stack it with other things and get up to a lot of double production. I normally build warehouses right next to my farm so that they can drop it right off. And then I build hearths around my fertile fields to make a quicker and easier break for them so they can get right back to picking and then loading into the nearby warehouse. That seems to work well. Once you can get like a bakery for the biscuits and pies, which is shared. Human housing takes bricks and wood, which is not, or planks, I should say, specifically. So it's not too hard to get them up and going. Porridge is actually relatively easy to get as well. And normally, because they are farming, depending on what kind of farm you have, you can use a lot. I believe wheat, or God, is it even called wheat? Probably using the wrong name here. Grain can be used to in porridge, so is vegetables, herbs, and mushrooms. So they have a lot of different uses. Also, fish now is added to porridge as well. So as long as you have a water source as well, normally I do like to spend at least get one pump, preferably with drizzle, because that's normally the best water to use. But clearance is a good backup, and then if you have to, storm is fine, but normally drizzle's what I like to get a pump on to just increase, or just for like water usage for my food and stuff. I tend not to be a big user of rain engines unless necessary. Again, higher play, the more you're comfortable with it, the better. I've done it before, I just tend to not use it because I don't like worrying about resistance and corruption on my hearth. There tends to be enough other problems in the game at higher difficulties that's just unnecessary addition to my problems. That being said, I've used it before. It depends on the situation. Again, there's a lot of RNG in this game, so you guys might think differently about certain species than me, but I would rate human pretty high. I think that just the base resolve being high, their shorter breaks, or I shouldn't say shorter breaks, but they're less time taking breaks, and the fact that they are good on fertile fields makes them extremely useful. Next, we're going to talk about beavers. Beavers is one of my favorites as well. I think I rated them pretty high last time. I can't even. I should have probably looked at my old tier list. I should have had that pulled up for you guys. But I'm a big fan of beavers. So beavers have a high base. I like things with a high base resolve, by the way, which you'll see here. So they have a high base resolve. Their demand threshold's pretty much the same. They're pretty much relatively close to the humans, except that they have a little bit lower of a base resolve, but then they also have a lower rise in demands than humans do. So they kind of make up for having the lower base resolves by later in the game not demanding as much as humans do. Beavers tend to be very good at wood cutting, which is like making planks, and they do a very good job at cutting trees, so you get like a additional 10% there, which is very useful. And they're engineers, so which is also a very good buff in my opinion to have. Not the most useful, but it's used in a lot of different things. That being said, their housing is relatively cheap to make. It's 8 planks. It's expensive in the amount of planks that you need, but if you have beavers, you're probably getting a lot of wood. If you're in something like the Royal Woodlands, you're going to have a mass amount of wood, and therefore making planks and housing for them is not a problem as long as you have something to make planks out of. I actually do like the lumber mill with the beavers because it just makes super cheap planks, and planks tend to be a very, very good out of the 3 resources. I think planks, fabric, and then bricks are my most important. Normally, you're going to want to pick whichever goes the best with whatever species you have for housing is my normal recommendation, and then whatever one you're not using, you buy. Normally, I like to try to get planks and then either fabric or bricks, but I normally almost always take planks as my standard of the 3 resources that I'm making, and then either fabric or bricks depending on what I need for my species. Normally I'll buy the other one from traders as it appears, and that will be enough most of the time. The issue is again, RNG. So if you have beavers, humans, and we'll say harpies, you're generally going to want to go fabric as your second, planks as your main. And then I tend to buy the bricks for the human housing at that point. But again, RNG can pop up where I might just get a bricks building, and I might just take it just to have it. Anyways, getting off topic here, because we're talking about housing a little bit in depth. Biscuits is one of their food sources for the beavers, and they like pickled goods. Again, biscuits isn't super easy to make, but it's not hard. Pickled goods is actually relatively hard to make because you need a container for the food as well as the food, which can be a little bit more complicated than some of the other foods in the game. Coats, they wear them, so fabric is good. You also need dye for coats now. They actually made coats harder, and coats already was kind of a very simple thing to make, which is why I personally like coats, but the cost of coats is worse now than it already was, because coats never really were valued highly, other than the fact that they are a need. So adding dye to them actually makes them kind of less cost efficient, more so than they already were. I think there was a YouTuber that made a whole video on how clothing was bad and like did the math behind all the materials. So I don't think they increased the cost from what I've seen. I believe it's still the same, and all they've done is add additional materials to coats. So cost efficiency wise, they aren't the best, if everything holds true, which I believe it does. Services are leisure, education, and luxury. So they have a lot of service needs to make up for their happiness. So although they are a little bit easier to make happy than humans, the services tend to be a little bit harder to make because they tend to cost a lot of resources and time comparatively to your complex food needs. But yeah, so very interesting for the beavers. That being said, on the hearth, they reduce firewood, or they increase firewood time, or fire time for like firewood, the sea marrow, the oil, and the coal that you put on the fire. So they are actually very helpful on the fire at some points. Certain maps they can be useful on, especially like the seal. I'm not saying they're the best on the seal map, by the way. I'm just saying they do have a useful ability to reduce the amount of materials you might need because wood is limited there. So if you're waiting on another source, you might actually want to throw beavers on initially to reduce the amount of wood you're actually using until you can get another source. So you have more wood for planks and other things. Overall, I think they're a relatively useful species. Trying to think of what else really what should be talked about here. There are house upgrades now. I'm not going to go into them because I honestly would have to look into that. I actually don't know off the top of my head what the housing upgrades are. I know most of the housing upgrades are like they gain, what's it called? Like space in the house. That's an upgrade you can build into it now once you're high enough on your tree from the citadel there. But we're not going to really go into that, but that does play a factor with everyone as well. But I'm not thinking too much about that because that's upgrades, that's additional things as well. For beavers, I think they're probably a A or a B. For me, I think they're an A. For most people, I could see them being B. I know a lot of people last time were like, they're not that good because they don't, the purpose that they serve isn't that great, and they were, a bunch of people gave me their reasons, and I actually do agree on some extent with the beavers. I can understand they kind of have niche uses. Once I have like one making planks and then the one's cutting the wood, that's usually about 6. I usually don't need any more beavers at that point. The only positive thing that I like about beavers is if I have additional fertile fields and I don't have humans, because their break time is higher, that keeps them on the fields longer so they can do a better job at maintaining the fields. And I'm a big fertile soil boy over here and I enjoy it. So I do like them for that reason. But I'm going to put them in B because I can understand why people would think they have niche uses. Engineering has a couple places, but there's not too many. Interestingly, lizards are next. I'm not a big fan of lizards, but I do think that the warmth, comfort bonus, and the proficiency with meat production are actually solid bonuses. I think the food production that they have is really used. Like, a lot of buildings have lizards as the one that's going to produce food. So when you're making, complex food, normally lizards are really good at that. It gives them like an increase in resolve because of the warmth, and a lot of them have like meat production in there, so they get like a bonus there as well. They're just usually solid in that. That being said, they tend to like meaty foods, and meaty foods cannot be farmed in fertile fields, and therefore you're relying more on hunting gathering. So let's jump into this. So they have about a base resolve of 4, or oh my god, a base resolve of 5. So that means pretty much going into hostility 1 and then you get a storm will mean that they are going to try to leave. They do have a good resilience, which means they leave slower than everyone else because they're really high resilient. So you just need to kind of keep them above the storm, and then if the storm does defeat you, you can usually burn some extra lumber or something if you really need to get your hostility down for, just to keep them from leaving. So there's ways to kind of control that, but I think it's a little bit harder because base resolve for me is normally the hardest part, because normally the beginning of the game is the hardest. Once I'm set up after like a year and a half to 2 years, I'm normally pretty good, and resolve isn't much of a factor at that point. The issue is initially it is, and having low base resolve and getting too much hostility can really mess you up. That being said, they do have high resilience, which means they leave slower. Like, I think it's like 4 times slower than the other species, which is actually nice because they have such a low base resolve. They have a low demand threshold of 15, so you're never really going to have a hard time once you get complex needs coming in to get their resolve threshold. You're really just trying to balance hostility at that point. Decadence, how much their demands rise, is relatively high. The more reputation points you get, they become a little bit more demanding. They have a high hunger threshold, which is really good too. And they take breaks a lot more, though. So every minute and 40 seconds they take a break, which is 20 seconds sooner than beavers, humans, and foxes. And frogs have an even higher break interval. So they have like 50 seconds, almost a minute on lizards. That being said, lizards are very interesting. So let's go down and talk about lizards. We already talked about warmth and meat production a little bit. I think those are actually pretty useful because they are used in a lot of buildings compared to the other ones. So I would say overall, like, a lot of these guys, like beavers and humans, have very niche buffs, where I feel like the lizard can really do a lot of different things comparatively. So the lizards like their housing, but they can take basic housing if you do so. I tend to try to skip basic housing. I think their housing costs fabric and bricks, if I remember correctly. They like jerky, skewers, pie, and pickled goods. They wear boots now. Boots is new. And they like brawling. So they don't have many leisurey things. Most of their stuff is food production. Going back to their buffs, they actually tend to do very well in food buildings, which means they support themselves in producing jerky and skewers most of the time, and pies. Pickled goods normally not as much. I think pickled goods buildings tends to be more of a farming buff, if I remember off the top of my head. Like, the granary is the one, my favorite one, and I know that has both fabric and pickled goods in it, and I believe humans actually get the bonus there. But for jerky and skewers, lizards do a good job. They kind of buff themselves. Their bonus at the hearth is that you get a bonus resolve, which can be helpful in a pinch. It also gives them bonus resolve because the hearth is a warmth area, so they get bonus resolve there. They're good to put on the fire normally towards the end of the game if you have them. Or, I shouldn't say the end of the game, but maybe the middle of the game to help your resolve come up before, like, storms and stuff. Sometimes you might throw them on there. Overall, lizards aren't bad, but I do feel like because of their necessary requirement of meat, they tend to be one of the weaker things. I'm going to put them in C. I don't think anyone's really D. I don't think anyone's extremely good. I don't think anyone's extremely bad. The issue with this game, there's a lot of RNG involved with every race, so even making a tier list like this is very controversial. I could see somebody putting them in an S, but I think that they're C. I think they have a lot to offer and are usable, but I think because their needs, even though they're very good at supporting their own needs, the requirements for their needs are harder to obtain than others. I tend to rate people that can use fertile fields to get their food higher than those who cannot, because it's your guaranteed food source once you find them, and it tends to be very helpful, whereas everyone else kind of has to use a camp to try to get their food. So yeah, I do want to say, out of all the camps, I actually rate the meat one, the one that you harvest meat from, higher than the other camps, because most of the time I would consider using farms over the herbalist hut in the other one, comparatively to the one to gather meat, eggs, and insects is very unique, because you can't really farm those things without like talents or cornerstones. So I rate that building as a slightly more useful building. And I actually think the game actually gives it to you later in the upgrade tree as well, so I think even the developers understand that that building is a little bit more useful comparatively to the others, because you're probably going to try to use farms most of the time to supplement, and then use that for your meats and your insects and eggs. Anyways, that being said, I want a little more discussion there, but I'm going to put them in C for now. I think they're a solid C most of the time. I think in certain maps, like the mushroom map, they can be a little bit higher because it's very high. There's a lot of meat in that map. But again, overall, I think C. Mushroom map, probably B. That being said, we're going to move on to Harpies now. Harpies, I like giving me some Harpies. I rated them like C or D last time, and people got furious that I rated them C or D. So, now that I'm like another 200 hours into the game, I actually really like Harpies. I forget what one of the comments was, but I actually read it, and I was like, I gotta try to use Harpies more, because I was avoiding Harpies because of the low resolve, this low resilience, and the decadence, and like the hunger, like everything about them was just like, I'm like, man, these things are so weak. Their break interval is just as good as the lizards, which just means they have a really bad break interval of 1 minute and 40 seconds. They take a lot of breaks. They have a lower base resolve of 5, which means they can die really easy in storms. Their demand threshold isn't bad. Their resilience is actually really low, so they just leave more than lizards would too. You really need to make sure you're prepared for the storm. Harpies, I think, for a newer player and someone without experience, you shouldn't really use Harpies that much. And I'm not saying that Harpies are bad, I'm just saying I think they require more experience than some of the other species do. But I actually think they are a very, very solid species. So let's talk about their specializations. They have Tailoring Alchemy. Tailoring Alchemy are probably two of the most seen specialties, like comfort and special. Well, one's considered a comfort, one's considered a proficiency. Are probably the two I see the most, other than like warmth and meat production overall. I think those are probably the next two you see the most. Their hearth bonus is that you get 5 more carry weight, which is just insane. It's a very, very good bonus to be able to carry more. It makes all your other people more efficient, even though that they take breaks more often. Adding them to the hearth and getting 5 carry weight makes everyone else that doesn't take breaks more efficient. It makes them more efficient as well, but it also just makes everyone more efficient in general. So it kind of negates their negative in a sense, as long as they're on the flame. For shelter, they can take basic shelter, but they also have Harpy housing. Harpy housing is only for fabric. Normally, you're going to want to have fabric production with Harpies, as they like both coats and boots. They like their clothing. They like paste, and they like jerky. So paste is a new food, so we're going to talk about that a little bit now. Paste requires dye, eggs, fish, or meat. So it's a little bit harder to make, because dye in itself, they added dye to a lot of things, like coats and stuff, I think, to make dye more useful, because dye was probably one of the least useful extra goods. So they added it to a lot of the newer stuff, I think, to make it more of a used resource. So dye is a lot more important than it used to be as well. That's something you should mention here. They like education and treatment. So pretty much that's what I have to say about the Harpies. New players probably like C tier, for experienced players, I would say probably A or S, because honestly, I think that they just have a lot of use. Their bonuses, their comfort, and their specialization are really useful. They tend to be used in a lot of buildings. The carry weight on the fire, if you just talk about, like if we're talking about Hearth, they're probably S tier. If we're talking about overall, we're probably top of A. The issue is you need experience. Once you have experience in the game, Harpies are solid. If you don't have experience, I would say Harpies are a little bit harder to use than the others. Just be aware of that. Definitely throw them on the Hearth if you have them, especially at the start of the game. If you don't need any of the other bonuses for any particular reason, just getting the carrier weight will make everything a lot quicker for you. Like construction, everything goes a lot quicker. So now we're going to talk about foxes. Foxes for me are a weird one. I don't dislike foxes, but they have a low resolve. They have a 5 as well, so they get really scared at storm time. They have low resilience, which means they leave just as fast as harpies at storm time if you're not ready. They have a low demand threshold, just like lizard harpies, so they're pretty happy. Their demands increase a little bit more than harpies do, but not so much as lizards. Their hunger threshold isn't high, so they actually have a little bit harder of a time than harpies, but they have a 2-minute break time, so you're back up with the humans and the beavers, so they take less breaks. I like taking less breaks. I like efficiency, so foxes have a little bit higher efficiency in the rate of they don't take as many breaks. Their house is actually hard to make. We'll talk about that in a second. So they have a comfort of blight rot, and then they have a proficiency of forest. I believe they used to be rainwater, but it got changed to more blight rot to give frogs rainwater. But they're good at like scouting and stuff. There are a couple other new things with forest, and I wish I could think of what they are off the top of my head because it would make them more useful. But forest is a little more useful than it used to be, I believe, as well. I think there was a couple things added that I've seen in my last couple of playthroughs when I was using foxes. Like, oh wow, they affect that. I think fishing. Isn't it fishing that I'm thinking about? I kind of want to look that up now, but I don't have easy access to it. Let me take a quick look if I can pull it up quick just to make sure I'm correct on that. But I believe fishing is actually the specialty is it doesn't have a specialization. I thought they gave it the forest specialization. Maybe I was just misremembering. Anyways, I was going to say they were actually really good at fishing, which would have made sense. That would have been an interesting thing to do with them, is make them good at fishing, to be honest. Anyways, I was wrong about that. My bad. But they have fox housing. So fox housing is, I believe, planks and crystallized dew. They're a little bit harder to get housing for, specialized housing, and that is a detriment, in my opinion, to the species. Not being able to get easy housing up, specialized, means you're going to probably have to use basic housing for a minute to keep them happy, especially because they have such a low resolve. I think, like, harpies is like a very hard newbie species, and I think fox is like a harder newbie species because it's like just a little bit more difficult to gain the happiness you're going to need. That being said, they do locate a water source, which means you can probably get early access to porridge, which is one of their food sources, along with pickled goods and skewers, which can help make them more efficient. They do wear boots now. They have treatment and religion as well as for their leisure. I think foxes, because they're scouts, and they do help a lot with glade events, which are generally your biggest obstacle in most game modes. Foxes are pretty solid. I used to rate them a lot lower just for the housing problem, and I still want to say that that is an issue, but I found in my time there are ways to overcome that. Especially, I tend to, like, a lot of the time in my game playthroughs, I focus on housing as my first need to fulfill, and then I move on from that. And I always go with specialized housing first. It makes me a little slower, but it tends to work for me. And then I go for normally food or coats or boots, depending. Normally now I focus more on foods than clothing, because I tend to have a harder time with getting the needs for clothing than I do food most of the time, and then I normally will choose clothing and then leisure in that order to fulfill. Unless there's a reason that I can fulfill something else, that tends to be the way I play around my species in-game. That being said, foxes are extremely useful because they do glade events. I'm still going to only put them in B. I can see them, like, I think they're more useful. Well, I'm going to put them in higher B than beavers. I think they're more useful overall than beavers are. I think glade events are extremely important to be able to conquer, and speeding them up a little bit more can be very helpful. They also have a low break interval. They just have a really hard start, and again, this is not, obviously, there's going to be people that are experts at the game at this point watching this, and there's going to be people that are not experts. For a non-expert player, right, these are probably B tier. For a better player, well, I actually did Harpy as a better player. We're going to probably put them in A. I don't know if I value them more than my fertile fields, though. I probably do. Because glade events are a sure thing where fertile field soil is not always. Next, we're going to talk about frogs, which is the new DLC race. I've played with them quite a bit now. I am quite happy. All we are missing now from basic buildings is to give somebody the gathering camp of, what's it called? Harvester's camp, a special proficiency or specialization, and then give the fishing hunt now that's been added a specialization, and we are good. We are good to go. So we need at least 2 more species, but I'm hoping to see the Harvester's Hut get some loving in the next DLC. I would actually like to see that. It would be interesting to actually do, they're going to have to do 2 because they don't do double proficiencies, which is something I would recommend that they do. I think having like a lesser proficiency would be an interesting addition to the game at some point as well, but we'll go into that later. I've talked about that in other videos. But let's finish this tier list. So frogs, they have a 10 for a base resolve, which is pretty good. So you don't have to really worry about the first storm, nor the second storm. Normally you're going to be alright. The resilience is medium, so they're actually pretty good at resisting the storm effects, because normally that's when you're going to go down into get the resolve where you're going to start trying to run away, which means that they're going to be about twice the speed, or half the speed of leaving compared to the speed of a human leaving. So if a human leaves in 30 seconds, a frog will leave in 45 seconds, a lizard will leave in a minute. We'll just say it that way. Like, that's kind of how it works. They do have a higher demand threshold of 25. Their demands don't rise really that much. They have a pretty high hunger threshold, and they take breaks at 2 minutes and 30 seconds. So they are probably one of the best species to have overall. Like, just if you're looking at base stats for them, very strong. They're good at masonry, which means you're going to get a lot more stone, because they're going to have a good chance of pulling double, and clay, and the sea marrow as well when you find it. And they're good at rainwater now. That was taken from the foxes, which rainwater is actually a pretty useful bonus. So frogs are pretty good. Everything I'm seeing from frogs as I'm reading just makes me a happy man. Now, talking about what they need. What are their needs? So their housing needs is they need a special house. There is no, you build what you want with frogs. You have to build a frog house, or nothing at all. Frog houses do take bricks, so that is actually not, it's interesting because it's not bad, like, for them in instance of what it is for them, because they are good at masonry, which means they're generally going to have access to getting a lot of stone and clay to make bricks. So they actually kind of support their own housing, but you do need specialty housing for frogs to live in. So there's no way to cheat around that. They also like porridge, which, again, they like rainwater, so that's not horrible as well. Paste, which paste is decently difficult to make now with needing dye and then meats. You're generally going to want to have access to fish for it. And then you have pies as well, which are, flour. They're a little bit harder to make. You have boots for them. I haven't really talked about boots, but that's a new resource. I did mention it, but I didn't mention what you need for boots. So boots take leather or scales. They are relatively difficult to make compared to like clothing in the sense of like how much it costs to make. They like brawling, luxury, and religion for their services. Overall, I actually like frogs are really good. Frogs having that 2 30-minute break interval is pretty strong. They have a high hunger threshold. They're not going to get mad immediately. They have good resilience, and their demand threshold doesn't go that high. So you're going to pretty much be able to easily take care of them. And both of their bonuses are pretty good. Stone is very useful. And clay is not as useful, in my opinion, as stone, but stone is very useful, and having masonry just helps. And then rainwater is pretty good, because there's quite a few buildings that require rainwater bonuses. I actually think frogs are probably S tier. They are a DLC race, and I haven't used them as much as the other races. Obviously, because I have probably like 300 something hours of the base game, and then the DLC came out, and I probably dropped another 100 at this point. But yeah, frogs are probably S tier. Their hearth bonus is pretty good too. So their hearth bonus is 50% faster for newcomers, which in the early game can be good and bad. It can be a detriment or good. It depends how well your settlement's going. Again, RNG. Everything's a lot of RNG here, but if things are going decent, getting additional villagers in the beginning tends to be very helpful. It tends to be, I would say, more positive than negative. Because you can do a lot more and get set up a lot quicker. And once you're set up, you're in a good spot. So yeah, I would say probably S tier for frogs. I could see S tier. I think they're really good. I think they are the DLC race. I think they made them very strong. I think the break interval for them is just so high. And they're not really bad. They're really not bad at anything. They can withstand a lot. They can take a beating pretty good and not get upset. So yeah, I'm putting them in S tier. If you look at them all from just like their stats, frogs are probably the best overall automatically. They just do everything better than everybody except lizards pretty much. So yeah, I think frogs are probably S tier. Just from base stats. If everyone in base stats, if we start looking at base stats, everybody will be moved. But they're really strong in base stats, and everything they do, it's pretty useful. So I'm going to put them in S tier for now. I'd like to hear what you guys had to say about my tier list. Tell me what your thoughts are on my final decisions and choices. Tell me if I should have been factoring anything else in. I think I did a pretty fair job of looking at them overall in deciding on all the factors involved, where they go. That being said, harpies and foxes I rate higher, but they are not as newbie friendly. I think lizards are actually newbier friendly than both those are, but I think that the fact that they require a lot of meat makes them a little bit more difficult to manage in that sense. I think frogs are extremely newbie friendly, and beavers and humans are pretty newbie friendly. So if you're brand new to the game and you get the options of humans, frogs, and beavers, you're probably pretty solid. I don't know if beavers unlock with the DLC immediately or if they are in the actual upgrade tree, because I'm pretty high up in the upgrade tree. I think I'm at 18. I think I got knocked down to 17 with the DLC, and I just got back to 18. But I'm almost in 19 now, I think. Anyways, that's my tier list, guys. Tell me what you think about it in the comments below. I'm a big fan of this game. I really enjoy it. The RNG sometimes drives me a little mad when I just get side blinded by some stuff, but I think overall this is a great game. So tell me your thoughts below. I'd love to hear them. And I'll see you in my next video. Later, guys.